Welcome to another Ideas That Matter conversation. I've got my good friend and colleague, Scott Tarulli here, somebody who originally started out as a client. And then as we worked our way through, studying Aristotle's rhetoric and various other texts, we found that we had so many commonalities, and we wound up, some of you may know, doing a classic metal class for a long time, which we might reprise sometime down the future. Now, Scott, the reason I wanted to bring him in here for a talk specifically is he is, we could call, an insider cubed when it comes to the music business, which has changed really significantly in the last 40, 50 years, and especially in the last 20 years. And Scott is a practicing musician, has done that really since your teens, I think, right? And so he's seen the industry from that side, doing gigging, studio work, playing on albums, being in a number of different bands, leading different bands. He's also a professor of guitar, which is kind of a cool thing to be a professor of at Berkelee School of Music. So he is helping young people, not just in terms of technical proficiency, but also thinking about larger issues, bigger things in scope in the music industry. And of course, he's got all sorts of contacts as well that we talk about fairly regularly. So he's not just drawing upon his own experience, but a lot of other people who talk about similar things. And I thought it could be quite useful to have a conversation about this, and we'll probably stray into discussing philosophy and other disciplines and what they might possibly have to do with music. And I do want to point out at the very beginning that Scott is doing something new for him, but it's sort of a natural outgrowth of a long process of development, which is offering mentoring sessions for musicians who want to step up their game and figure out how to actually earn a living in this tough music business. So did I leave anything out, Scott, that's particularly relevant or you want to bring up right away?
No, that was a great introduction, and yeah, that's it's all we can go from there, I think.
Well, I think, something that might be a good lead in. I mentioned that you teach a lot of younger people, and I think there's quite a few who have, let's call them imaginary, just to be nice, ideas about the way things work in the music business. And part of this is kind of rooted in the past, the way things used to work, a mythology about that. Like, if you just put in the work and go on tour, somebody's going to discover you, some talent scout, and a record company will, come up to you and say, we love your work and we want to make you the next big solo artist, band, whatever. And they think that like they can accelerate this by putting their stuff on YouTube and playing in their bedroom. And there are some success stories like that, but those are the real outliers, right? The exceptions. That's not generally how things work. And you and I have talked about this in the past. The music business has become much more difficult to earn a living in and to break into, particularly as a young person. So when you have these crops of students coming through your classes semester after semester, what would you say are the biggest misconceptions that they come in with that they need to be weaned away from?
Yeah, so we're talking college age, like 18 to 22.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of this stuff is what I call is the Silicon Valley message.
Okay.
You got a phone, you've got a video camera, you've got garage band, you got a recording studio, and bam, you're an artist. And I think a lot of people will use a buzzword that I think is being pushed, the word that drives me crazy, which is branding, right? What's your brand?
Yeah.
And I actually kind of find that a bit of a weasel word, because a lot of times when it's kind of like, well, when they're asked the question about like, what's your brand, really to decide these things hastily is kind of a disservice. I mean, being an artist is a lifetime, it happens over a lifetime, and
Yeah.
you're lucky it doesn't stop. So, maybe they say, what's your brand right now? But it's just, in my opinion, that people could stay away from that. I understand a lot of people want to sit in their bedroom and make Instagram videos and get big that way. And I have a few people that I respect very much that have done it, but really it hasn't been that many people that's happened to.
Well, and can that translate into, so you get big on Instagram,
Right.
and or perhaps YouTube, and you're putting out videos and stuff like that. Is it difficult to translate that into like getting to go on tour or selling merch, or the things where people actually do in fact make money in the current music business?
Well, there's the potential, but I always go back to the Tracy Chapman thing. Back in the 80s in Boston, Tracy Chapman got discovered by playing in the subway here in Boston. And suddenly in that time, everybody had their guitars out in all the train stations, because they said, this has got to be the formula. This is, and I do have a lot of former students that I'll touch base with and say, well, you've got a lot of followers here. What is that equated to? And surprisingly, most of them are saying they're not making any money, or they got a free guitar strap. But the problem is, technology moves so fast now, and maybe you hit it big at 19 on a platform. I don't know what the shelf life is of somebody on there, because we're inundated with so much information.
That's right. There's a lot more turnover, right?
And so what do you do when you're 21 now?
Yeah.
There seems to be this missing thought of planning ahead. And I think when you say wean away from, maybe I'll push them towards a set of skills you can have that you will be employable. For example, something as simple as being able to read music. I've generally a lot of my gigs don't involve that, but I can read. So some of my biggest gigs have involved, they'll say, can you read? Sure. And then I'll end up on the bandstand, and then there's a nice check to follow, or developing your ears, or developing, you have a set of skills. If you have a set of skills, you're going to work. It's not like, in basketball, if you can get a layup, you're going to work. It's not about, all the slam dunking or all that stuff, is kind of what I compare it to. So I think, and, the set of skills, meaning, as an artist too, is somebody that wants to write music, wants to, and I think I encourage a lot of these people to go. Boston has a lot of players out there, but I'm kind of shocked at how few people that age go out to shows. The Cafe Society, as I call it, is still out there. And, if a student were to go to a show every night, nothing will ever beat the handshake. And I think most people that have ever done business, the second you meet someone and do the hang, you're at the top of their list. You're no longer a profile picture that they.
Right.
And, I encourage people to go hear shows, go hear it in person. The intrinsic value of being in the moment with the aesthetic energies of the room, the musicians, for better, for worse. And that's where you kind of meet people. And I mean, that's how I did it. The internet didn't exist when I was, not for a while when I started, but, back then it was like, well, what's the secret? Well, there is no secret. I just said yes to one gig, and then my career took off. That was it. So I guess that's a long-winded way of answering, but I would kind of wean them from saying that they, especially if they're going to go to school for it. But if they want to, there's nothing, I guess I should say, there's nothing wrong with going on Instagram and YouTube, nothing at all. But if you're not doing the other stuff, if you're not being part of a scene in a community where people trade ideas, where people trade recordings that they've, that's what we used to do, CDs, and we were more well listened back then than most people are, in the younger generation.
Yeah, I guess you could say that where people are going wrong is thinking that if I just do this, if I put all the eggs into this basket, then things will take off for me, not realizing that when things do take off for the people who are doing that thing that they're thinking about, it's because they've got the connections. It's because they also, spent time analyzing what other musicians are doing. And now to go back to the branding thing, as you're talking about that, I was thinking about somebody who's a prime example of a artist who changed his brand several times. One of the most important and influential people in heavy metal, Ronnie James Dio, because when he first started out, he was a crooner, in front of a band that wasn't even remotely connected to heavy metal. And I forget exactly what name it was Ronnie and the Prophets, right? So it was like a
That's
rock
right.
and
Yeah,
roll
yeah.
band. And then he's in this other band, Elf, which has just a terrible, ugly album cover. And they essentially, if you've ever listened to them, they're okay, but they're certainly not great. And they were kind of heavy metal. And then the band essentially gets poached by another luminary person, Richie Blackmore, who knew what he wanted to do. Very dynamic personality, forms Rainbow, takes Elf, kicks all the other members out except for Ronnie James Dio, replaces them with some other great musicians like Jimmy Bain on bass. I think Cozy Powell was at the start on drums, and then now Ronnie James Dio is doing something different. And this is where like the heavy metal persona starts to come in. And Dio is very intelligent and humble. And he'll say, yeah, I learned about showmanship from Richie Blackmore. And then when I was in Black Sabbath, and then he goes and does his solo band where now he controls all of the elements of it with Holy Diver coming out, I think in 83. And he just takes off from there. And if you were to look at Dio in, say, 2000 or 1990 or 1985, and you didn't have that whole backstory, you'd be like, wow, this guy was like the heavy metal icon from step one. But no, he was doing two different kinds of music before that and had a different persona, a different stage personality, even, slightly different name, I think, when he was with Ronnie and the Prophets. So, if he had branded himself at 19, 20, 21 and said, no, this is my brand, I stick to it, then what happens when you meet a Richie Blackmore who's like, hey, I got this idea for a different kind of band, we're going to make history.
Yeah, I mean, they would call that a rebrand, but I think intention is a big point of this.
Okay.
I think he's a great example, but I think that stuff happened organically as he grew as a musician. So, being open to working with Richie Blackmore, being open, and finding out that he has one of the best voices in that genre,
Yeah.
Well, he'd be considered that, at least in my book. And I think, yeah, I mean, I was shocked to go back and hear like he was doing like doo-wop kind of things, right?
Right.
But I think it was an organic, I don't think he said, wait a minute. He's not like sitting at Dio headquarters going, we got to rebrand this and and I think we saw a natural progression of somebody's artistry, and
Yeah.
it wasn't made in a lab, so to speak, in his case. So I think it's a really good point. Yeah, but again, it's not, I understand what people mean by branding, but it's for whatever reason, it's a word that kind of bothers me because it's just a tired word now.
Yeah.
It's kind of like, what's your brand? And I make my living as a musician, but I don't know how I would answer that. What would I say? I don't know what my brand is. Maybe you can tell me. In other words, I haven't deliberately.
Well, that's actually a good point, though. Maybe you can't really know your own brand on your own, and you need the eyes, the brain of somebody else who's intelligent, who actually pays attention to what you're doing, not just some person coming in and spending 10 minutes looking at your catalog from the outside, but somebody who actually knows what you're doing to be able to give you the answers to that.
Yeah, there was one class at Berkelee where they had some, I think there was some executives from TikTok come to speak to one of my classes.
Oh, interesting.
And it was, I got to see from Silicon Valley side and about being very, they were very kind of a little bit aggressive about,
Okay.
you need to sharpen up, you got to do this, and you got to, and I noticed everything they said, these weren't artists speaking. And I think everything they said, nothing had to do with the art itself. And
Okay.
I think we all realize that these people that run the apps make a lot of money off of exploiting people that want to be famous, with ad revenue and stuff. And to me, it seemed counterproductive to have somebody come in and speak about, I mean,
Here's
TikTok,
students.
yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
TikTok's a real thing, but people talk about the old and the new. Oh, that's the old model. Well, it's not the old model. It's a model that still exists. TikTok is a model.
Yeah. Yeah.
And not to put people down that do it, because I would never, but it's not it's a model. It's a way to do it. And if it all, I think people need to really start organizing what their goal is today for their future. Is it, some people do go on tour. I have a former student that she just did a tour with another TikTok person, and I don't know what kind of shows they were, but it's kind of, I don't know, as far as merch, again, we're so flooded. I mean, when I go through, just I'm targeted on social media that it's always going to be music, or it's going to be gear.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm thinking that, there's only 24 hours in a day, and I only have so much money in my bank account. So if everybody's like, well, you just go to this and you make millions on merch, I don't know of any personal cases like that. I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but I don't know anybody that goes, I can retire now. I did TikTok and I sold out all my t-shirts or whatever.
Well, it seems like there's like a threshold. We could call it a certain tier for artists. And I think that these are the ones who get the majority of the attention. And a lot of younger people are like, well, I just need to be like them, where they can make it on album sales, or they can stream enough that they'll actually make some money. Although we'll talk about how streaming has radically changed the music industry as far as income, and they can sell enough merch, and they can headline tours at arenas and bring in a ton of money that way. But they're like probably not even 1% of 1% of the musicians who are out there. And it's interesting too, because you can say, okay, well, you've got them, and they're really at the top, and then you've got everybody else, and everybody else is just kind of Joe Blow wandering around doing things, and they're not making it big. But a lot of the bands that we think of as really big, solid, well-established artists, they're still struggling. I mean, I think that Judas Priest still goes out on tour in part because they need to make money, and the way that you do it is not through selling albums that much anymore for them, even though they're one of the biggest metal bands in the world. It's through, going to various venues and playing, typically bringing somebody else along with them who's also kind of struggling. Like we've seen Judas Priest with Thin Lizzy, Steel Panther, Uriah Heep, and Saxon. And every single one of those bands is a great band. Now, Thin Lizzy, of course, is not the original Thin Lizzy, but they're playing Thin Lizzy stuff. And they still do have one old member, Scott Gorham, in there, and they sound good. But if they don't get out there, they're not, they're if they retire, they've got what they've got, and that might not be enough. And so I think a lot of people don't realize that there's the stratospheric artists who are going to do great no matter what, unless they do something stupid and get themselves somehow canceled or something like that. And then there's everybody else, including some really solid, well-established 20 albums in their catalog artists who still have to scrap by.
I think, well, you're raising a good point there. In short, there's really no middle class in music now. As I put it, I think in the 80s, if you were really good, at least in Boston, what I saw, you didn't have to be signed. The clubs were packed and they were there to see, you. And I remember being in town, seeing the lines across at all the great clubs in Boston. And, once in a while someone would get signed, the Cars came out of Boston, Till Tuesday came out of Boston,
Yeah.
etc. And, but for the most part, if these bands worked hard and if they were good, you didn't need the internet. People always say, well, how, if you don't have your stuff on Spotify, how are you ever heard?
Right.
Well, you mean nobody heard of anybody until the internet? That's not true. I was there. So I think that there's this thing that there's not really a middle class, because on one hand, even people around our age think the only way to do it is to give the music away for free, which is I think if we're calm,
it's a devil's bargain, right? Because you get some awareness, I think this is the term that they use, right? Brand awareness. But you're giving it away for free. And so then how do you get somebody to actually want to pay for it?
Well, that's it. And I've been somebody that I sell my music on my website. You can buy physical CD or download. And people give me a hard time about it. And
that's interesting. Why do they give you a hard time about it? Are they giving you a hard time because they're like, old man, you need to get with the times. Spotify is the way to go.
Yeah, well, get with the times is one. And then people ask me something that I can't understand. How do you expect people to hear you? And I just say the same way we heard about everybody in the 80s and 90s, in the 70s, there are people part of the cafe society. It's not as many, but like I go to shows, I buy tickets to local shows. And even if it's friends of mine, I'll show up and I think there's something to be said, we could always talk about, relationships with other people and treating people with respect. But to be part of that is satisfying for me. I do enjoy hearing good live music, original music.
Yeah.
And, so I get flack for it. And, but I don't need just about everybody I know. I know a few people that do well, very, very few, maybe 1%, less than 1%. But for the most part, the people that have their stuff on, I always find it weird that they're begging for a listen. Would you do like I played with artists as a guitar player?
Yeah.
Stage where they're begging, just will you go stream this song just once? Will you go give me a like? And I thought, where's your merchandise? Where's your,
That's interesting in part because what that means is that the Spotify model and other streaming models, like Apple Music, don't really work, because if they did it, the premise is, well, you put your music on there, people are going to stream it. This is how you get your, this is how you get awareness. This is how you get some traction, and then this is how you make it big. And if Spotify won't do that, except for like their super famous artists, then
which they have a deal up front, by the way.
Exactly.
They don't work for what we work.
Yeah. And you have to invest your own time and treasure, as they say, then it's not as productive as they're pretending it is. It's sort of like YouTube. I mean, people can, getting away from music, you can like create tutorial videos, and, there's this whole like industry out there, and you can get some ad revenue from that, which in retrospect is probably a little bit more productive than trying to go on Spotify, right, with your music. But
right. Yeah.
YouTube isn't going to automatically catapult your videos up to the top. You have to bust your hump promoting them in one way or another,
or pay for it, like a lot of people do.
That's true. Yeah.
And
and there it gets really counterproductive, right? Because if the whole goal is for you to earn revenue and you have to pay to get eyeballs or, ears onto your content, then whatever you're paying is coming out of that, and it's coming out up front.
Well, not only that, so it's in the, I guess let's compare two things. People complained about record companies.
Right.
They weren't all sleazeballs. People did sign bad contracts. That's true.
Yeah.
Even if it was a bad contract, you'd be given your, even if it was 50 grand up front to make the album, and then you were put on the road with a label mate that was a headliner. And then there was your chance every night to go out and you have 20,000 people captive in the audience. And
Yeah,
it
yeah.
sounds like a much better deal, even the bad side of it. I mean, yes, people owe the record companies money for their investment. If you invest in something, you want a return. My problem is I have to invest my own money for the album. Spotify's not saying we'll pay for your album and then we'll stream it.
Right.
10, 15 grand, let's say, to get an album, if you're gonna, use musicians and studios and stuff. And that's coming out of your pocket. And to put it up for free it doesn't seem logical to me. Now, I just think the healthiest thing is for people to step back and go and watch the language they're using. This is the way, this is the only way. No, it's
Yeah.
not. It's a way, and it's legitimate. It does exist,
Yeah.
but I don't use it. And it's so funny because people send me Spotify clips all the time. I said, I don't really use streaming. And they think that's ridiculous. And I said, well, I still do buy vinyl, and I have plenty of stuff to listen to. And if I really need to hear it, it's on YouTube. But if it's kind of like, you need to learn this song for something, or check out this version that was never released of Iron Maiden. So this idea of, so I want to go back to the people buying followers, like Instagram. It's what I've done is I'll go and people like, this person's got, an unthinkable amount of followers, but I'll go to their followers and I'll click the profiles. And as I get 30 in, they're all blank.
Oh, bots. Yeah.
So it's a number. And then you can see the comments are bot comments, like, really awesome, cool.
Yeah, so cool.
Yeah.
Can't wait to listen more.
So, and then there's the other thing, which is the middle person. And I don't know if you've gotten this too. You probably have for your channel, where somebody will present themselves in an email to me saying, if you pay us, we're going to make this happen. But that's kind of a unilateral contract, because
I get at least 2 of those per week. And the biggest one right now is they're telling me that my videos, they start out by kind of negging you. They're like, you're not doing as well as you should be. You could be, your stuff is great. And you're like, you've never watched any of my stuff. Right. But they'll come out with a compliment, and then they'll be like, you're only getting this amount of views on these videos. And sometimes they're right. And sometimes they're just like making stuff up, right? Because they're not actually checking figures, because that would cut into their time. And their business model, I think, is basically just flood the internet with this and see who will bite. And then they will say, your video content would go really, really well on TikTok, YouTube Shorts, and Facebook Reels. We can do this for you. We'd be happy to do one for free. And then, it's like a drug pusher. You get your first taste for free, and then we'll charge you for the rest. And because of the kind of stuff that I do, I'm like, well, these people don't know anything about my channel, because most of this stuff would not make good TikTok or videos or reels or anything like that. It would take a good bit of work to make that happen. And these schmucks are not going to be the people to do that. I've also been getting another kind of interesting thing that's been in the last year or so, because I do have the Sadler's Lectures podcast.
Yeah.
And and this is like not so much companies, this is people. And they will, first it was, when are you going to have a podcast? We want you to take these videos and turn them into podcast episodes so we can listen to them. And after a while, I went back and forth, and I was like, okay, I'll do that. And that was about 5 years ago. And I've got about 900 episodes at this point in time of essentially videos that I took, short videos, like 10 to 20 minutes. And then I boost the sound quality, take out all the ums and ahs and filler words and pauses and places where I say the same word twice, or all that silly stuff, right? And then I uploaded it into SoundCloud, because SoundCloud was what I picked 5 years ago to use. And in SoundCloud, you can get access to all 900 episodes. And so, first I was just on SoundCloud, and people are like, why aren't you on Spotify? That's what I listen to, or they would say, Apple Music or Google Podcasts, or pick whatever else you want, and I'd be like, how hard is it for you to listen to something on SoundCloud? But
Right.
but people are kind of lazy in that respect. They want it to be on their favorite thing. And so I found out this very funny thing. On SoundCloud, all 900 episodes or 900 plus are available. If you go to any of the things that pick it up, like Apple Music or Spotify through the RSS feed, they only store 500 episodes. So a couple of years ago, somebody was like, not all your episodes are available on Spotify. And I looked into it and I was like, oh, okay, yeah. Only the latest 500 episodes are going to be available, which, for a podcast like mine, which puts out a lot of content, that's kind of an issue. And it was the same thing though. I was like, well, if you're bothered by this, it's so easy for you to not listen to it through Spotify and to go to SoundCloud. It's, basically free, and you can listen to whatever you want to. Nobody's putting up barriers or anything, but people still, they're so platform dependent, which I guess is a matter of habits or mindset or something like that. They're like, well, if it's not on Spotify, it must not be real. Or, if it's not in my preferred listening platform, then I don't take it seriously.
That's, yeah. I mean, and I want to also bring in, so I get asked some things, about, well, if my stuff's not on Spotify, I have to like say, you can't look me up on Spotify. I had to pull my stuff from all the streaming. Now people get, layman's or whatever, people that don't know so much of that, they think, maybe you haven't made it, you're not important on that. But the other
interesting.
Yeah, which anybody could, like, you and I can, make a crazy song and stick it on Spotify, just, something ridiculous. But the other one is, I'm really surprised at how many people that are not in the music business will ask me about American Idol. And I say, I don't watch American Idol. And they're shocked because they're under the belief that this is the best singers in the world. This is the music business.
Okay.
And I have to explain, well, it's a game show. It's basically a game show where, they put people in with sad stories. So you get an emotional attachment to the different people, and they get emotionally engaged. And I'm not putting it down. It's just, it's not reflective of the arts, of the art itself. And no disrespect to the people that sing on it. I mean, why not? But I think we're having a hard time. It just makes me think about the middle class thing. I'll do shows in town. There'll be 2 bands on the bill. The ticket will be $20, and people will complain. What, $20? That's, you greedy, whatever. Meanwhile, they just go to pay $2,000 for a Def Leppard ticket.
Oh yeah.
So, I'm thinking, there's absolutely no middle class. Your $20 for my show, or, 2 bands, is way too much to spend. And then, of course, if you've ever been to a concert, people are on their phone or too drunk, or, and so for me, it's like, what's my demographic? Well, it's not TikTok, because let's look at the numbers for what they are. Less than a third of America is on TikTok. That's less than a third of America. And 60% of those people are under the age of 24. So we're not looking at, I mean, if you look at the numbers for what they are, if you Google how many subscriptions to Spotify, there's not that many. I think it was 80 to 100 million, but we have what, 350 million people in the country. So if we kind of look at these numbers, I just, I think, and I always catch flack for it because, I take the extra step to think about it. You and I have talked about how hard is it to buy from an independent bookstore. Well, that's the extra step they don't want to take because they can get it on Amazon with a click.
Yeah.
And habit, it's interesting, but for me personally, I don't want that to guide what I'm trying to do as an artist. jump on trends, but we know how fast things change and how things becomes obsolete so fast. I mean,
Yeah.
like Alvin Toffler has this term he uses, opsolage, which is obsolete knowledge, which, the new platform comes out, what you spent 2 months working on, it's in there, but it's useless information. And I don't try to then learn the newest and greatest. It's not how I want to spend my time.
Yeah.
And that's just me. But I do think that's a message to people. It's like, hold on a second. It's not the way, it's a way. You do have a choice in the matter,
Well, now that is really important. This gets to some of the stuff that you and I have studied over the years, and that I think ties in with the mentoring. So if it, like you said, if it's not the way, but multiple ways, now you're faced with the problem of figuring out which of these is the better means to the end that you want to attain, which is like being able to, I mean, some people it might be like fame and fortune, right? But maybe let's be a little bit more moderate, being able to make a living doing the kind of thing that you want to do, creative activity. So this could be the music business, but this could equally be visual arts or other things as well. And so when you do have to make decisions, a lot of people get kind of worried about that, and they would really prefer if there was just one way, so they don't have to do the sorting through and uncomfortable, sometimes anguished work of deciding what's going to be their priority. But if you want to be successful, you do have to think these things through. It's what we call practical reasoning, right? Reasoning about practical matters. And people are willing to do this with, financing a car, but which, they're only going to have for 5-10 years, but they're less willing to do that, I think, with their whole life, to sort these matters through. And I think another thing is, part of what we're saying here is it's really important to be brutally realistic, not like doom
yes.
and gloom and everything is a catastrophe and we'll never make it, but to understand the difficulty. I mean, in the past, I don't apply for full-time academic positions, but when I did in philosophy, say, 10 up to about 7 or 8 years ago, every time I would apply, there would be 300 to 1,000 applicants for any given job. Now that means odds are low that I'm even getting into the first step of interviews. And if I pretend to myself, oh, if I just believe, or, maybe if I got on TikTok, I mean, that wouldn't help with academia, that'll give me an edge. Or what if I send a nice fruit basket to these people or something like that? You have to be honest with yourself about the odds, and the fact that there's many factors outside of your control that you don't know, and that you can focus on the things that actually are in your control. So, whether you practice or not, if you allow yourself to get down and you're like, well, what's the point in practicing? Either they're going to find me and they're going to like me, or they're not. And you're not a punk band, where lack of practice could actually be, for some people, a draw, right?
Yeah.
But you're doing any other genre, you'd better practice. And practicing won't automatically lead to success, but it's a necessary condition for having success. And there's all these other things that are necessary conditions as well.
And I think when you and I studied a lot of the Stoic stuff, it really gave me a foundation to what I've kind of always believed but couldn't put into words.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
So Stoicism, the basic premise that I got out of it, the first thing is you actually don't have control of very much.
Yeah.
Maybe how you look at things, but I'm constantly asked, by younger people, what's the secret? Just give it to me. Just give me the prescription and the pill. I'll take it. And the truth is, there's no formula. It's so far out of your control. And I mean, to the point where I do know some of the most negative, no-show, flaky people that step onto major gigs all the time. And they would be, this person would, or these people would be, not this person, these people would be a recipe for what not to do. But what are you going to say? But then you have the
Yeah,
people put in, it always bothers me when people say, and I accomplished this, and it was entirely due to my hard work and dedication. And I think it's good that there's hard work and dedication. Maybe it factored in, but I don't think we'll ever really, it's like when actors, the Will Smith saying, I'm famous because there wasn't a day in my life I didn't think I wouldn't be. Yeah, well, you tell that to the thousands and thousands of, people serving coffee in New York City that wanted it more than you. And,
right.
that was like in the 90s was Zen in the music. Everybody read the Zen in the art of, that was the thing. And now it's putting it to, well, it's been putting it to the universe, but I encourage people to let that go. And it's an awful lot of pressure to put on if I do this, because if you expect something to happen and it doesn't, that's going to lead to indignant thoughts, where somebody gets something that you think you deserve, envy,
Yeah.
it was supposed to work out this way. Why did it work out for this person? Because you didn't approach the situation with the right mindset, which,
Well, that's the thing. Any one of these systems and its proponents always have that out. So, they'll say, well, these are the 10 steps you need to do. And the person does the 10 steps and then things don't work out for them. And they're like, well, I don't think you really did step 8 right. Your heart wasn't in it. And that's why it failed. Try again with doing step 8 better. And then they do it and they still fail. And they're like, well, I think the real problem was we got to go back to the beginning. Look at step 1. You didn't fully understand, and you can do this game with people forever. You didn't work the system properly is like the mantra.
that's so true. And that was the thing with what was the book, The Secret? And it said repeatedly, wish it and it will happen. Oh, I was always shocked at the amount of people that said this is the greatest book ever written, because I think all of us have had daydreams about a lot of things that never happened.
Right.
Or, and then to say, well, people on Wall Street know about The Secret. Do they? Is that what they're doing at Wall Street? They're talking about The Secret, and, they're talking about the book they read that made them in the position that they're at. And it's kind of, but the fact that so many people grabbed onto it as, well, this is easy. All I have to do is believe and it'll happen. And again, you're not taking a step back and thinking it through.
Yeah.
And
So you mentioned Stoic philosophy as helping with some things, and you and I have spent a lot of time talking about and studying Aristotle as well.
yes.
Were there other movements, schools, thinkers that you encountered that you're finding are helpful, not just for you, but also like you're introducing your students to in bite-sized pieces?
I think also another one that that I got really interested in. I think you remember. Oh, come on, I'm free. It's the Sartre. It's the lecture, the Sartre lecture.
Oh, existentialism. Yeah.
Existential, but the book I'm forgetting. It's the
Existentialism is a humanism by Sartre. Yeah.
Now, even just the basic soundbite version of it is interesting. You're born and then you become what you are. It's not predetermined, is his point. And some people say I was put on the earth.
Yeah.
I think, it kind of balances with the Stoicism where, look, you don't have control of much, but maybe the parts you have control of are talked about by Sartre, where I forget the line exactly, but it's basically creation precedes purpose. And
yeah, or he puts it in terms of existence precedes essence.
That's
and you
what
decide what your essence is going to be. And I think you're right. There are interesting overlaps when we look at what we call philosophies as ways of life. And so various kinds of existentialism, Stoicism, Aristotle's work understood in the right way. And there's many others out there. What they're getting right tends to be saying similar things, not exactly the same thing, because there are some differences, but saying similar things in different contexts, right? So thinking, let's go back to like the thinking about what would you like your life to actually look like in terms of being a musician who can earn a living and practice your craft with, you know, some level of freedom from interference of some, you know, executive telling you, I want it more poppy, you know, or
Well, right.
I think
Yeah,
at one
sure.
point, if I remember right, in one of our conversations, you had a client who wanted some music and they said something to you like, I think it needs to be more orange. And you were like, what the hell does that mean? And then you gave him something and he was happy with it. You're like,
There was
yeah,
a producer.
here's the orange version. Right?
Yeah,
But
producers. I've run into that a lot where it's, or even I think the story I also told was I had this one session that drove me crazy. Usually you show up, you listen to the track once and they go, give me kind of a Nile Rodgers thing from Chic. And you know what that sounds like, or
yeah,
make
yeah.
Andy Summers from the Police. But this guy kept saying, I need the flavor. I need some of the flavor. And I said, well, is it Motown flavor? Is it, but it gets frustrating because either they don't know what they're trying to say or they're poor at communicating. I mean, just because you have the role of producer doesn't mean you're good at it. But
Right.
I remember that session being challenging because I was getting frustrated at throwing things out. No, not that. And then, on this session, it was, still CDs. I said, will you pull out a CD and give me an example of a guitar player playing what you want me to play? They couldn't find it. And, finally just whether he liked it or not, he agreed on something. But yeah, like, exactly. It's kind of like so abstract. It's kind of like, I have to figure it out.
Yeah. So to circle back, so being able to be a musician as part of your life, how you earn your money, being relatively free of crazy people that are putting weird restrictions on what you're going to do, that requires means end reasoning, because you've got an end, you've got a telos, as we would say, a purpose, and it's one that is, it is individual to the person, but it is also something that we can generalize about. You could say, if you want to be a musician, just going back to the practice thing, you will not be able to develop the skills that you need without a regime of practicing, right? And even after you've become big, you still have to practice because you don't want your skills to decline, right?
And practicing,
So,
yeah. And practicing could include developing your artistry,
right.
exploring the instrument, like anything, because practicing, a lot of people, you've heard of that, like, if you learn music theory, you've ruined your creativity. And,
Well, now that is an interesting thing to bring up. And I imagine to a lot of listeners, that would be a surprise to hear. Why would people in the music industry be telling you that learning something theoretical about the basis of this thing we call music, which includes like what sounds can go with each other into chords or arpeggios, or how to shift from one key to the other, why would that be a deficit? Why would that get in the way of being a good musician? That seems counterintuitive.
it's a buzzword for people. People pride themselves in the self-taught thing. Well, everybody's self-taught. If I sit down and I show, and they are, because even at
Yeah.
all my students, I don't show them the same exact thing, but there's fundamentals we work on. But how come they all sound so different when they use them? Because it's up to them to process this information in a creative way. And my other thing is, if you're a creative person,
Mhm.
no matter how many tools are in your toolbox, you're still a creative person. So I don't understand how it would stifle creativity unless your mindset stifled you. But having more tools, if you're creative, you're
Right.
to go, oh, this is interesting. So I could do this, I suppose, and I could pull this from here. Because when you're learning theory, there's this misconception that it's like we're telling you what you can and can't play. Well, that's not true. You're developing your ears. You're getting yourself more tools. So when you're putting this together, like you. That's why I don't mind if, I don't, well, a lot of times when I hear a player, I never go, I don't know if they studied super hard for years, or it was just, somewhat natural because they heard albums. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter to me. And, it's like when people find out like, oh, reading music's gonna take away. Well, how can it take away anything?
Yeah.
You have the ability to sight read now. It's not like you're suddenly non-creative. You have to get rid of this part of your intellect or your energies to be non-creative.
Do you think that like the trope that a lot of people use, which doesn't actually appear to have much of a basis in science, at least in its generalized thing of right brain versus left brain, like I'm a right brain person, this person's a left brain person, and you don't want to like mix up the creative part and the logical part because they're sort of like oil and water. I've always thought that that sort of dichotomy was silly, and I didn't take people seriously who would articulate the world in that way. Do you think that that sort of simplistic thinking leads to this idea that if you're bringing structure, if you're bringing skills, that somehow that gets in the way of genuine musical creativity?
No, and I've always used this comparison. At one time I was maybe, we're going back 25 plus years. I was relatively fluent in Spanish, but believe me, those Spanish classes were brutal. And remember, you had to go to the labs, like you had to do labs twice a week with it. And that was like, these are the verbs. This is how you conjugate them. But after a while, like you and I are speaking, if somebody came up and said, excuse me, gentlemen, what were the adverbs and the adjectives you used in that past sentence? Wasn't there a dangling participle? Well, we would go, what are you talking about? Because this is something, we learned how to speak English, but if say we worked really hard on the second language and it became fluent, you're not thinking of the initial stuff that you studied.
Right.
You're speaking in your own way. We talk about doing imitations of people, not just how they, but the way they speak. Like take Christopher Walken as a great one. How he enunciates is, you can imitate people because we have our own way of speaking, even though the English language is what it is. And so I think learning a new language is a perfect thing because music is a language that's processed by the language part of the brain. I know a lot of people think it's mathematics, but I never understood that argument, especially if you're improvising, we're improvising now. And we have command of the language enough. If you were to start talking about giraffes, I could take that left turn with you and start talking about giraffes.
With the mathematics thing, so you can say that music is mathematizable in the sense that like it's all sounds, right? We can represent them with waves, as it's what we do when we're producing things and we're looking at the sound waves and tinkering around with them and using effects. And you can express the relationship between notes that are on a page that you're reading, whether it's in actual musical notation or tablature. You can express that mathematically too, but that doesn't mean that music is mathematics just because it can be mathematized. And there's going to be all sorts of other dimensions to it that are going to require other matters to be, we could say, blended in, right?
When you're talking about like serious classical composition, if you're looking at 17th, 18th century, there's a bunch of rules, like when you study it, but I don't consider that mathematics. I consider that more like computer programming, which I did as a youngster. That's much more creative. So in other words, here's the end result. You need to write a number guessing game on a computer. Now, if you were given that assignment and we knew how to program, I bet you we would have different, our programs would look different because you would arrive to the end at the end.
Yeah, there isn't just one single way to solve the concrete problem put in front of us. Even with mathematics, like I majored in math in college. And I was a big skip stepper, which my teachers in like K through 12 hated, and they'd get on my case about it. And then when I got into college, they were like, hey, you want to skip steps? go right on ahead. There's different ways of arriving at the right answer. Of course, if you make a mistake along the way, we can't figure out exactly where you went wrong, but that's on you, buddy.
Right. Well,
And
that's a
so
great point.
I could kind of like visualize where we were going. And I did, generally skip steps. Now, sometimes that did get me into trouble if I forgot like to bring a negative sign in, and then I'd get the wrong answer at the end, right? But the different people in the class would arrange problems in different ways. And I think with mathematics is a great example, because people do think that like there's one single way. If there's anything that we know for sure, it's mathematics. But even with that, no, there's different ways of working at stuff.
What's the difference between arithmetic and mathematics, right? Arithmetic is different.
Yeah.
Mathematics is, I remember the guy in college, he was like one of 4 people working on some problem, which means there's not a one way to answer what, I mean, it was beyond me. He kind of on an office hour, he would kind of said he was working on this thing. I'll never forget going, oh wow, that's like, it is kind of endlessly and creative to like, start here and you need to end here, and whatever happens in between is on you, is the impression I got from what he was talking about. But yeah,
to go back to the structure creativity thing, and to bring this into philosophy, and also to tie it into your mentoring program that you have now. So I think that maybe some people have a similar attitude about philosophy. They're like, well, I don't want to like spend a lot of time reading these texts, because then people are going to be telling me exactly how I need to think. And I want to be a bit more, loosey-goosey, creative, man. And they don't realize that, hey, you can, nobody's telling you when you read Stoic philosophy that you have to become a Stoic. You can learn from it,
right.
and take what you want, just as much as like if you were going to listen to, I don't know, you're going to pick some guitarist, and let's not pick somebody who's well, actually, let's pick somebody who's dead, because then at least the catalog is fixed. So Fast Eddie Clark, you want to learn to play like Fast Eddie Clark, who is most famous for Motorhead, but also Fastway, and has got kind of a cool sound, to his stuff. It's quite identifiable. If you like listen to his stuff and you even like pay close attention to it, and you try to follow along, you get like the music and you learn his solos, that's not going to make you only be able to play like Fast Eddie Clark any more than studying Aristotle is somehow going to like put these blinders on you. And now you have to look at everything through the lens of Aristotle's philosophy, although it will be helpful in a lot of cases. Like some of the concepts we've already looked at so far, like thinking about what end you want to attain, and then considering what means and what needs to be a priority, and whether there's multiple means to get to that end. Aristotle can help you with that. The Stoics can help you with that,
I mean, Aristotle may give suggestions, or the Stoics may give suggestions.
Yeah.
I don't remember in the Aristotle reading a bullet point checklist of,
Right.
like the big thing, the stuff I enjoyed most in the rhetoric was, the emotions and how anger works, because, and this is something I use with my students a lot. I don't go, Aristotle said, but I think in, giving the list of at the right time, at the right person, to the right degree, all that, but also, the 3 basic things that make people angry. Because it's going to happen, especially in this business there, or to add on, or perceived contempt, even if contempt wasn't given, if you perceive. And I think it's important for all of us, if we get angry, we have to know really why we're angry. And that, I think the Aristotle was instrumental in me going, wait a minute, I thought I was mad at this. That's not true. If you at the beginning, I actually ran the things and go, no, it's not that. Or I got mad because that was just spiteful.
Right.
That was just, they didn't gain anything from that, but after a while, the more, and then, it also helps you be compassionate to others, where it's like, well, wait a minute, I need to understand why they're angry. Even if they don't know, you could kind of say, well, I think it was probably this. And that comes to the relationship part. When I mentor, I really talk about relationships of any kind,
Yeah.
when you're band. And, if you can, I think we all could, we all could be protective of our art. And then when you're in a band and it's a democracy, you might start thinking a new way to handle a situation, with even just that bit on anger, with
Yeah.
and it's helped a ton. And I think, and I have some students actually, uh, two students, that are off doing big things now. I remember early on, because I was at Berkelee, I was doing the mentoring stuff, because it wasn't just skills and everything. I said, I brought in the word magnanimous, the way that
Okay.
we talked about it,
Yeah.
the different reasons. I said, but in your case, when you're going to be held to a different standard. So, when you get, if you do start touring and people, start even having, parasocial relationships with you, and you're at a venue,
Yeah.
and, but, navigating, being kind to them, because, of course, boundaries,
Rather than dismissive, right? Or
rather than,
yeah.
yeah, we always go back to the Dio thing. I learned what not to do from Richie Blackmore.
Yeah. And Dio was somebody who, he related to the audiences. He would say things like, I'm so happy to be here with you. And it comes across as real.
It
Whereas with
always,
like a lot of bands, they're like, it's like insert blank here. How are you doing? Block, 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 and they're like looking down Chicago, Cleveland, and is everybody feeling good tonight? With Dio, if he asked, how are you feeling? You actually felt like he cared about how you were feeling. And that isn't a parasocial relationship, where how could he possibly relate individually to every single member of the audience,
but I always felt he was sincere, even,
Yes, yes.
like like one time, he was doing Don't Talk to Strangers, and then he says, don't talk to strangers, and he put the mic out and everybody shouted the last thing. He goes, you get it right every time. And it's just like, woo, like, we're just like, but
Yeah.
he's, and I always found him to be sincere. And well, I guess it goes to show, we know the story about when he went back to that place. Where was the country that he was in, where he said, we're setting up tables and these kids took buses they're going to miss, or trains
Oh,
to
right.
that place. And
Yeah.
there years earlier with Blackmore, who just walked past them all.
Well,
And
we saw something like this, and you've heard me tell this story before, but I'd be interested to hear your reflection on it. So we went and saw Kiss, who by this time were like a massively influential band, live at Letterman back in the early 20 aughts. And in New York, it's very difficult for a band to get away because of the architecture without like having to be encountering some fans. Whereas like in other places, the band can like go out the back door right to the bus. And so anyway, people are all waiting outside to like, say a few things, shake hands, get autographs and all that. And it was really interesting because there were 4 different limos for the 4 different band members. And 3 of the band members hung around and like chit-chatted, not for like, 20 minutes straight or anything like that. And you could say, well, Eric Carr and Tommy Thayer, they're not fully members in the same way that the original, people they replaced are, but they hung around, and Tommy Thayer's been with them for what, 20 years,
great.
and so it's not like he's just Johnny come lately and he's not a star in his own right. And he's signing autographs and smiling and stuff like that. Paul Stanley hung around and he's doing that. The one person who like put a towel over his face so he didn't have to see anybody and went immediately to his limo, Gene Simmons. And people were trying to like, say, hey, Gene, can you sign? And he just like wouldn't even engage at all. And we were like, yep, that kind of shows you something. Now, it could have been just an off night, but I kind of get the idea that that's the way it typically works,
It's so funny because a friend of mine, and I went to see Night Ranger a few times,
Okay.
maybe about 15 years ago. out comes Brad Gillis, Jeff Watson, um, and everybody's and they're hanging out. It's like, and it's the first time I met Brad Gillis, and I met him at NAMM a few times. It's just really nice guy, and they were just out there signing whatever you wanted, and if you wanted to chat, and it was, we're talking two guitar players I respect a lot that I grew up listening to, those Night Range records.
Yeah.
And the first running with Jack Blades is he comes out with a towel over his head with 3 escorts like this. And, nobody was rushing him.
Yeah.
But a few people, like you said, were saying, hey, Jack, will you sign but, he wasn't going to be bothered. Maybe an off night. And then my friend and I went again years later. And a friend of mine was the guitarist that replaced Jeff Watson. And so he got us kind of back to hang out, and everything's going great. Kelly Keagy always looked like the sweetest guy, the drummer, the singer. What a nice guy. We're talking to everybody. And I guess it was part of the meet and greet. And Jack Blades goes, why don't you just get in the picture? Come on, And then he's like this, they take the picture and he runs off. And, it's kind of interesting. It's like, well, that's twice now, where it was, and
is that enough to constitute a pattern is the question, right?
Yeah. But I mean, I can understand if, you get the drunk guys laying into you and, I, did this and I had my first date to Sister Christian, and, I can understand.
Yeah, that would get old pretty quick.
That would get old, but like nobody was doing that.
Yeah.
So, but I think, the Gene Simmons one is interesting. I think a lot of them, I've met some people that were my heroes that turned out to be great.
Zero. Yeah. I was going to say the contrary would be heroes who are zeros, right?
Yeah. And but that's what good to go back. I discuss, and they'll text me every once in a while, my former students, I'm being magnanimous. They remember the
interesting.
And because I said this is a big word, and I kind of I said I can barely, like you said, I can barely pronounce it.
Yeah. I even get tripped up on it every once in a while.
But it's this kind of thing that, like, it's this mindset you should have that, with good boundaries in place, that, if you're a little tired, it's okay to take a picture with someone that bought the ticket or drove maybe 3 hours and rented a hotel room just to see you play. It's not much for you to shake hands and have a short conversation about your gear.
Yeah.
And
I like this idea, actually. So for those who are watching or listening and don't know what we're referencing, so magnanimity is translated as great souledness, is a virtue in Aristotle's virtue ethics, and it has to do with how you deal with people giving you or not giving you honor or respect, or however you want to frame it. And the magnanimous person, the reason why this applies to rock stars is they are a person who deserves a lot of honor, and they do demand it, but they don't demand it from people who are kind of lower than them. They demand it from their peers, and they demand it from other people. And with people who are lower, they're easygoing. They're willing to engage with them. And it's opposed to being vain on the other side, where you're like, yeah, I'm so much better than everybody else. You have to give me honor where you don't actually deserve it. And then being self-deprecating, being small-souled, as Aristotle says. Like, if you're a big deal, then you get to behave as a big deal, but there's a right way to behave as a big deal that still preserves these human relations. And like you said, it can take the concrete form of saying to yourself, yeah, this couple probably drove from, this other city, and they're not demanding like I hang out with them in their hotel room, or sign their infant's forehead or something. They're just looking for a little interaction with me. and they were good enough to come to my show. These are, and it represents a sort of proper perspective. And I think that this is a great example for showing how ancient philosophy, properly understood, thought through, and then applied within the scope of something very, very contemporary, the rock and roll scene in the 2020s, can bear incredible fruit.
Mm. Yeah, no, and it just kind of goes better because I know, I even know some former students that met some of their heroes, and it didn't go well.
Oh, yeah.
And I asked one person, and I said, well, how you doing with that? Well, I have a hard time listening to those records anymore. And
Interesting.
I had that, I've had that too before, with the way somebody acted in a concert. I won't mention the name, but it's
Yeah.
a well-known person. I shouldn't have mentioned the Jack Blade's name. I don't know.
Now, is it because you expected better? So like, I was just
Yes.
thinking, like, we talked about Richie Blackmore. Richie Blackmore is known for being a jerk and, being tough on his bandmates, firing people really
Yes.
easily, scowling as he's looking at the crowd, like not cooperating with we're all here to have a good time kind of thing, right? So if Richie Blackmore, you meet him, let's say you get a backstage pass and you walk in and you're like, oh, Mr. Blackmore, I love your stuff. For him to say, buzz off, kid, wouldn't be a surprise, right? But if it's somebody else who has a more cheery persona,
That's it.
Maybe it would be a surprise.
Well, that's so funny that you say that, because in college, my friends and I used to do these skits. We would make them up differently, but like we'd walk in and I'd like be flicking my hair around and like, whatever, kid. And so we call it the 80s attitude.
Okay.
Right? So, we used to kind of do these, but like, we thought at the top of the pyramid was Yngwie Malmsteen. And,
oh, yes.
And we love Yngwie. We love his music. And we kind of all agreed that if we met him and he kind of pushed us aside, said, whatever, kid, we'd be like, oh my God, that was awesome. It's kind of like the Beavis and Butthead, like when Todd would run over their bikes and he thought like Todd was so cool.
Yeah.
Like, if Yngwie turned out to be nice to us, I mean, he did actually. I met him just once, and he was really nice. He was a really nice guy. But like, we used to have this thing, like the goal was to be Yngwie, and you would expect it from, and actually in a good way, where you have the kind of sense of humor to go, now my life is complete. Yngwie's like totally brushed me off, like. But he's, in real life, the one time I met him, he was just shook my hand, pleased to meet you. And that was it. And, but
that's really nice to hear. Yeah.
Yeah. I think, but I think the other person, it was a shock. It was a shock. And, it was, even kind of the point where it's like, he knew he's like, that he was saying such not great stuff that he said, it's been an hour, you can't get your money back now.
Oh, wow.
I know. And
that is so cynical,
it was dark. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then it was just kind of like, people were walking out, people were booing. And but let's just say his behavior was the antithesis of any of the lyrics of any of his songs. Like
interesting.
So, and I have to admit, it's been hard for me to listen to his music because
it changes what we call an ethos, right? And this is something that we studied in Aristotle. Ethos means character, and right. You present a certain character through your music, and if it doesn't map onto what let's call it your actual personal character is like in your interactions with fans, then there's going to be kind of a dissonance or disconnect there.
That's actually perfect. Yeah, because you also, I think we talked about this, you feel betrayed because, we did that whole episode on, bands doing 10 farewell tours, and, and I think if there's an ethos going on and then you turn out not to be that, you feel lied to. I mean, right. We'll go back to Aristotle now. I mean, this person doesn't know you, but you feel kind of lied to, maybe like I felt, that it was contemptuous in the sense that I didn't matter. I'm here to I'm here to like be grumpy and, piss you off, and then like go as far as to say you can't get your money back. It's been an hour, and I'm thinking,
Yeah.
wow, like, it's hard to take it personal because he doesn't know who I am, but I think that's, would we
I
just,
think most people would take it personal though, quite
yeah,
frankly, you know.
yeah. I mean, was it us that was discussing the unwritten contract you have with your audience?
I was just thinking about the term trust, right?
Yeah.
So let's take the issue of the farewell tours. When you say we're going to have a farewell tour, and this is the point that Dee Snider was making and criticizing them. There's a whole bunch of things that the fan base, the audience, is trusting. Like, this is the last chance I've got to see these people. The merch that's from the tour is going to be kind of unique, and I need to get my hands on that to show support. And this is the last opportunity, for they might do solos or something like that on their own, but this is the last time to see this configuration of the band. And then when they decide to go back out on tour, especially if they're not like acknowledging the fact that they've already done a farewell tour, which I think is the case for some of the bands like Kiss and Motley Crue and Ozzy, as well. It does show contempt for the fan base. It's like, you're a bunch of suckers, you're there for me to exploit and lie to. And if I change my mind about the farewell tour thing, I'll just start up again.
Yeah, no, and yeah, that was a big thing about the we, it's kind of like, you think we had a deal, oh, we would, like you hear for years, we wouldn't be number one if it wasn't for you, our fans, we owe it all to you, our fans.
Yeah, yeah.
And then I guess when it comes out that somebody's been not so sincere with you, and
Yeah,
you go back to the people that, like, I always go back to the jean jacket, right? Got the Triumph patch. In our day, it was like, Kiss, but these people were emotionally invested in the music.
that's right. Yeah. And then it is a parasocial relationship. So it's perhaps governed by some other norms, let's say, than a truly like friendship relationship. But I think there is, like you said, an unwritten contract with the fans. You're there to do something for them. They expect, imagine like if you got on stage and you're supposed to be, a metal band, like let's say take Raven, right?
Yeah.
So Raven still tours around. They're still putting out great music. Imagine if like you go to a Raven show and you're like, oh man, I'm going to hear Seek and Destroy and, all these other things that I really like. And they're like, tonight we are playing, show tunes. And there'll be metal show tunes, but it's all show tunes. You'd be like, what the hell? And it might turn out to be good, but it's definitely not what you came there for. And you'd be rightly ticked off.
That's a really fascinating point, because the only time I don't agree with that, this goes back to the 80s. Linda Ronstadt, it was a huge thing. She came to this place called Great Woods, which is in, the outdoor venue in Massachusetts. It sells about 3,000, maybe 10,000. But she had a new album, and it was all kind of, as I remember, like Latin bossa nova.
Mm-hmm.
And
yeah, she reinvented herself a couple times.
Yeah. And so when people bought a ticket, there were, everybody was walking out because she only played the new album.
Okay.
And so my thing is, well, if an artist is coming on the road, you should listen to the new album. They should be representing the new album. But, if it was just thrown upon you, like, you go to see Raven and there's nothing on it. Well, now we have the internet to look. Oh, the reviews have been great. Well, tonight you have the rare treat of seeing us do show tunes. That's kind of, I don't know if there'd be an interesting argument or discussion about, can you do that at that level? Like, if they want to, it was like Jeff Tate did that cabaret thing. I don't know if you remember.
No, I don't.
It was
know about
crazy.
That,
but like, if he went out and did it, you knew what you were buying a ticket for.
Okay.
But I don't know. You don't have how much if you're a big star with a diehard fan base, how much creative license do you have unless you're known for being completely off the wall?
Yeah.
Like,
so case in point, Primus, right? Super into Rush. We saw Primus about a year ago, and I think it might have actually been called the Farewell to Kings tour. And they began with playing some of their, classic stuff, right?
yeah,
And then the second half of the show, and it was a long show, they just basically like marched their way through Farewell to Kings. And everybody liked it, I think, but it
yeah,
was, if you didn't know what was going on, you'd be like, what the hell is this?
yeah. Well, and another one I remember. Do you remember? If there's metalheads out there, the Iron Maiden album, A Matter of Life and Death.
Yeah.
Now, I love this that they came out and did the entire record, and then they took a break and then did like 5 of their must plays or 6 of their must plays.
Yeah. Yeah.
There was a lot of backlash to that.
Interesting.
But I'm thinking, how many times can you hear the Live After Death set? I mean, it's a great album.
Yeah.
And I think it's well within an artist's rights to play their music. How if the new album supporting the new album is on par. Now, the Farewell to Kings is kind of random. I would have probably dug seeing them do that.
Yeah, it was great. It was a fun show. It was also one of the weirdest audiences that we saw. I think Primus tends to bring that out, And actually, going back to something else, and we do have to wrap up pretty soon.
Sure.
Something I thought about very early on in our conversation with going to shows, right? So something that's different from when we were young, like teenagers and 20 somethings, and going to shows now, is that you mentioned people like being on their phones, and some people are recording with their phones, and I think, yeah, okay, kind of makes sense. They want to memorialize it. There's also a lot of people just like doing random crap on their phones. But the thing that I find the weirdest, and it's not just a young people thing, there's lots of older people doing this as well, is it seems like whatever show I go to, there's a constant stream of people that can't sit still and watch the show. Usually they're like going up to get beers, and they'll come back. They can usually only buy like 2 at a time, 2 cans of beer. And they're leaving like in the middle of a song, not like in between the bands, right? The opening band and the other band. They're, like a great song will come on, and then you see them get up and they're like walking off towards the back and getting themselves something. Now, maybe some of them are going to the bathroom and couldn't hold it or something. That's understandable. But a lot of the times they're coming back and they've got their 2 big cans of beer in tow, and it'll only be like 15, 20 minutes before they've managed to slam those 2, which they paid a ton of money for, right? And then they're back walking again, and you're like, didn't you come here to see Armored Saint or Wasp or Michael Shankner Group? What the hell's going on here? And we went to this music festival called Bourbon and Beyond down in Kentucky, and it was a huge, huge venue. And they had like, Brandy Carlisle and Pearl Jam, and I forget who else we saw there. It was like, we were there for two nights, and it was, it was cool to see these bands. But the weird thing was there were probably about like 150,000, maybe 200,000 people there. And there was like a river of people constantly walking in front of us. We were in grass seats and we could see over them, so that wasn't a problem. But you're like, where the hell are all these people coming from, and where the hell are they all going? And they were like constantly circulating around. And I think that there's something going on there, and I don't really have my finger on it, but a restlessness, an inability to like go to a show where you're, what is the purpose of the show? You're there to see the band, to participate in the audience experience, not to just go off and like, I don't know, buy merch at random times, or, get your 8th beer, or.
And that's a great point, because going to shows in the 80s and 90s or 2000s, early 2000s, I didn't see that. I mean, I see it a lot now, and it's just,
Yeah.
it's crazy.
And people were like buying drinks and stuff, but you would like
Right.
do it at a certain time, and then you'd come back and sit your butt down or stand up, and you wouldn't really, I mean, other than like trying to sneak closer to the front, you'd stay in your place.
I also find it strange, to combine the new album thing. I'm generally curious to hear the artist's latest work.
Yeah.
Like I saw Styx once, and they had this album Cyclorama, and I'll never forget JY being very apologetic before they played. They played 5 songs from the album, which I think is good.
Oh,
But
wow. Yeah.
he was very apologetic. Okay, just bear with us. We're going to do another one from the album with the carrot on the front. And I was most interested to hear that music that night, because of course I love the classics, but I want to hear, that's what we've talked about being a nostalgia band where your set's the same for 25 years. But
Right.
but a lot of people, that's the times people would just go to the bathroom again. They don't want to hear the new stuff. And that didn't happen. Our generation didn't used to do that. But I see our generation doing that now.
That's it. It's not something we can blame on, oh, the kids these days, no proper appreciation. It's Gen X who are like getting up and wandering off, and you're like, what the hell? What's with these people? I mean, and I don't do that at concerts.
No, I don't
we
either.
get there, we sit, we're gonna hear the whole thing. I'll admit I record stuff on my phone.
Yeah.
But I'm not recording like every single song, because I actually want to see with my own eyeballs through a screen what's going on up on stage, So, but I want to be respectful of your time, and we were going to talk a bit more about the mentoring thing. So why don't we close with that? I was very excited to see you posting about this, because knowing you as long as I have, it feels like kind of a natural progression of your skills and talents and mindset to, you've been doing all these other things. You've played on a lot of people's work. You've got your own albums. You've got, a good practice as a gigging and studio musician, as somebody who's teaching younger people. But now this idea of bringing it into like one-on-one mentoring about how do you do well as a musician, that's kind of stepping it up, I think. And so I'm curious why now? How did you arrive at doing that at this point, which I think, by the way, you're perfectly well suited to do this.
Thank you. I think, well, really, I think studying the philosophy started introducing something new to how I taught. So okay. For those of you that don't know, I studied rhetoric in college, which I said was probably the best class I studied because it protected me as a musician in my 20s. So, I wasn't setting up syllogisms, but I was using a lot of the stuff to go, wait a minute, and I thought I'd get back into it, and I was watching Greg's videos, and I decided to contact him. We started with rhetoric, and what was happening is I was already getting burnt out on just teaching. And what I mean by just teaching is you come in, you're working with the fretboard and the in my case, and the mechanic or the theory, and then the rhetoric started organizing my thinking. So Aristotle didn't tell me what to think, but we used to take examples, and I said, well, this would be really useful for me, and I shouldn't hide it from my students, because this is actually a good point. So what I found over time was there's a lot to being an artist, specifically with what I'm talking about, a lot to being an artist that goes beyond the fretboard, that goes beyond because there's hurdles, there's obstacles that get in our ways, whether it's self-doubt, whether it's envy, and a lot of them are vices that get in our way. It's kind of an emotional thing, right? Indignant, when I were, it meant something different back then, but that's how I use it. Like actually being upset that somebody has a position you think you deserve more. Well, that's really not helpful. How do we remove this stuff?
Yeah.
um and it's not just about that. What I basically what it is when somebody's interested, uh they give me kind of a list of their goals. So I did a few trial runs with some people I knew, and I asked for feedback. But basically I said, what is it you have to have, if you want to do the mentoring program with me, you have to have kind of a clear vision
Yeah.
of what you, as opposed to find the weaknesses in my playing and make me better, which is fine.
Yeah.
But I started using these tools in my performance recital classes with students, because they would comment on music if their peers would play. That was awesome. That's not much of a critique, though.
Yeah.
So, getting into this kind of this big, thinking about stuff. And so with the trial, I had a lot of interesting things. Like one of the people said, one of their big things was, how do I not get depressed looking at Instagram when everybody's doing so much better?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And I had to think about that one.
Yeah.
I kind of came up with something. Then somebody else asked, I want my career to take a new direction. How do I make it that people don't have me pigeonholed anymore?
That is a big problem. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I'll usually ask what they're after. And so far, like anything that's been asked, I've been able to assist with, as far as, and the teaching's more conceptual. In other words, instead of here's a C major scale, I mean, that's important, but pushing a creative part of maybe organizing the pitches in there, piquing curiosity to the point where the student says, well, can I do this? Of course you could do that. You just came up with that. I came up with that. Yeah, you came up with that. That's yours, and so the teaching music wise is conceptual. And I think for the other stuff, it's just kind of like a lot of it. I am in tune with mindsets of people. I tend to be able to tell what's holding them up, because it's a lot of stuff that held me up for years. I mean, look, all of this stuff, I'm still practicing. I wouldn't be a good mentor if I said, I've got it all solved. I'm perfect now, and I'm going to show you my 10 top secrets.
Yeah.
Well, there's a secret because, and I'll say to the students, look, I'm working on this too. Every day. It's not a perfection. It's a work in progress. And that's kind of the beauty of it.
Yeah. I think that's something really important. It makes it, instead of like relating to the great guru up here on the mountaintop, it's relating to somebody who's further along in the path and can say, yeah, man, I've had some trouble with this. I've screwed up in the past myself. And here's how here's the thing to avoid that I did, as a knee-jerk reaction. And here's how I got through it. That lends a certain relatability, let's call it, which may motivate people better than having the guru who's, never screwed up in your back pocket.
I think that's a good thing, because I put up a video months ago, and one of the people said, I see all these people and they're like, oh, you're just jamming, just fidgeting around, and it's a perfect take. And I had to say, look, more times than not, that's not true. If you were to really ask that person, it might have been their 300th take.
Yeah.
Or sometimes people will lip sync with their instruments. I know that, but what I did is I put up a video. I was working on a transcription of pianist McCoy Tyner, and I got it up to tempo, and then I went to record it. And I looked, and I had like 12 takes before I actually got it right. And so what I did is I cut up the 12 takes where I just fall on my face, all the way. And the final one isn't even me doing it right.
Yeah. And
it's me like kind of cursing, damn it, and then I put that up there for a reason, because it's kind of like, look, I'm certainly far from perfect. I'm not going to pretend to tell you I did this in one take, because I didn't. And I'm fine with that. It doesn't make me feel less that, this thing I couldn't do in one take in front of the camera. So
Yeah.
it actually doesn't matter,
I've had something kind of similar with my own videos where quite often people don't know this. I will start out talking and then I'll be like, nah, that's not right, or I'll lose my train of thought, or I'll mispronounce something, and I'm like, all right, let's do it again, and it might be just one take and then I get it right, or it might be, five or six, and usually by the end of fifth or sixth, I'm like, damn it, and I'm swearing and stuff like that. And I have taken some of those and put them as outtakes for my Patreon supporters.
That's cool.
And yeah, and people like it, because they're like, yeah, it's good to realize that not everybody gets it on exactly the first take. And as a matter of fact, let's bring this to a close by talking about a different analogy coming from music, but also I think that can be tied in with mentoring. So there's the takes issue, but when you're playing, right, if you screw up, the worst thing that you can do is to turn your screw up into something that becomes a crisis that stops you. Like if you play the wrong chord or something like that, you just keep on playing.
Yeah.
And you don't have to pretend that everything was perfect or anything like that, but you do have to move on. And I think that in a lot of the problems that we have, people allow themselves to get stuck. Something happens that they don't feel good about, and then it's like the end of the world.
Yeah, that's true. Recovering from, if we're talking about performance,
Yeah.
it used to, I had a big problem with that. I used to have panic attacks 2 nights before a gig when I was, in my late teens, early 20s. What if I screw up?
Yeah.
And now, it's par for the course, except, when you do like more major gigs, and the band's rehearsing 6, 8 hours a day for 10 days, that might be different. You really don't want to screw up. But, if you're doing pickup gigs or whatever, or improvising and going for something, the trick is to detach yourself from the outcome. And there's not one
Yeah.
way to do that. There's not
Yeah.
one way to do that. Like it's not just say and do. That's short-sighted. But, when I screw up, now it's kind of like, and I'll say that to people, when they perform for their final, I'm like, I'm not deducting by mistakes. If the overall is outstanding,
Yeah.
in one note you hit a wrong note or misfretted something, then that's fine. If the overall was cooking, it's accidents
Right.
accidents do happen, and I've heard the best of the best do it. And but they didn't quit their instrument for it. So I think that's
Yeah.
true. I think it's recovering from that stuff. It was really difficult for me, but of course, if 3 different people came up to me and with wanting to solve that, we might get 3 different answers because of the people they are.
That's right. And I think that being able to recover from mistakes is something where it's going to involve some creativity,
Yes.
but also structure at the same time, which is a nice way of circling back. So we're almost out of time. Is there anything else that you wanted to bring up or talk about briefly?
Not really. I just, I just kind of launched the program. I did the post about a week or so ago, and I'll be doing mostly posts on my music page on Facebook, and my Facebook page. Instagram is a little more difficult, but
Yeah.
I will be putting kind of a flyer in it, and
Oh, cool.
yeah,
And,
like
we'll put links in the video description
yeah,
to how to find Scott, and yeah.
yeah, and I'm more excited for this because I do enjoy mentoring more than strictly just teaching, because mentoring is like more hands-on. It's more interesting to me, and I
Yeah.
work with people, and it's kind of like the thing how things kind of changed. And from my perspective, as I get older and learn and progress, and I want to help people do the same thing, especially younger talent that you know it's early in the road, and this stuff is really good. No matter what you plan on wanting to do, at least you may enjoy the journey.
Well, that's good. This is a great place to leave off. Thanks so much for joining me for this, Scott. Happy to get you on camera again,
Yeah,
and
for a while.
yeah, well, because we haven't been doing the metal shows, but maybe we'll resume those sometime
We
down
should
in the
resume
future.
those.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, that is where we're going to leave off. Thanks to Scott for all of this. And if you want to find out more about him, we'll put links in the video description. You just click show more and all of that stuff will pop up.